Victoria MacDonald from Channel 4 News. It was made very clear that this inquiry could not recommend corporate manslaughter charges, could not go there. But do any of you think, or do you know if any complaints have been made officially to the police?
I'm not aware of any at the moment. I should say that, as well as being the chair of the Society, I'm a criminal barrister, and one of the aspects that, sadly, the delay has caused is the fact that there are doctors out there who should have been prosecuted for manslaughter, gross negligence manslaughter. Doctors who were testing their patients for HIV without consent, not telling them about their infections, who then went on to sadly infect their partners, and they then went on to die. Those people should have been in the dock for gross negligence manslaughter. And sadly, because of the delay, that's one of the consequences, that so many people will not see justice as a result.
I'd like to add that that extends to the politicians and the licence makers that licensed Factor 8 when there were clear warnings in place. This has gone on for so long now that the people that were around at the time will be very hard to track down if they're even still alive. And that's one of the testimonies of the cover-up and the delays in getting justice to this scandal. Is the time that it's taken has meant that justice delayed really is, in this case, justice denied.
I think a lot of the villains in this story sadly have now died. In particular, on a clinical level, I would include Professor Arthur Bloom and Dr. Charles Ritzer, who were the two leading haemophilia care figures at the time, and for whom, if they were still alive today, I think there could well be a case for criminal charges, and that's just a testament to the fact that the government did not launch a public inquiry earlier at the time it should have happened, probably in the 90s.
I mean, in the report today, it says that there was enough public interest in this scandal for the inquiry to have been launched around 1986. Just think about the delay for a moment and think how many people could have been brought to justice at that point but haven't.
I think we need to be aware too of the deliberate destruction of records. The records, not just patient records, but records kept by the Department of Health, and that has become clear in the report that they were deliberately destroyed.
And also the evidence that was coming forward and being placed in front of government by campaigners that was dismissed. I think today is about the vindication of many of those campaigners, who some have sadly died, and I think that's what needs to be remembered, that this has been 40 years of cover-up and campaigning.
Can I add that there's an unprecedented aspect to this inquiry, because Sir Brian Langstaff has said that this is not his final word. He is not sending his final report to the government today. The recommendations that he's recommended, he said that the government will have to provide a report to Parliament within 12 months about those recommendations, saying whether or not they are going to implement them or explaining why they are not going to implement them, and he will expect them to account for that, which I think is unprecedented, because what the chair of the public inquiry is saying to government is, I don't trust you. And that's what the community have been saying for decades. I believe there should be a presumption in the Inquiries Act that recommendations from inquiries should be implemented unless government can provide good reasons why not. Why is it that we continue to have these burning injustices? Why is it in the United Kingdom we continue to have these scandals? It's because we ignore the recommendations of public inquiries, and that must stop today.
Hi, sorry, Joe Pinkstone from the Daily Telegraph again. I just wondered, my understanding is that there's some court cases that have been paused while the inquiry makes its final report. I wonder if you feel the final report is enough of a sense of justice, or if you'll be perhaps resuming legal action against the state.
In regards to the group litigation in my name against the Department of Health, that will very much, I think, depend on what the government does now, particularly in terms, it's a civil case, depending on how they come forth tomorrow with their proposals on compensation and what that looks like. I think that will go a long way in helping to decide what we do with that case next and if we lift the stay. There are other litigations, such as the Trelaw litigation and other litigations going on as well, but I wouldn't be able to comment on those.
Hi, Emeline Van for Radio France International. What's the general feeling at the reading of this report? Is it relief, renewed anger, vindication?
I think for me, there's been a whirlwind of emotions today. I'm sure everybody on this table would agree with that. When you've been building up to a single day for 40 years, there's no wrong or right emotion about it. But for campaigners who have been doing this for so long, for saying the things that are now in this report for so long, I think relief, absolute relief, will be an overriding emotion, and that's certainly the case for me.
I think many feel that like this is the beginning of the end, because having had an excellent public inquiry, and we should commend the chair and his team for the inquiry, the ball is now in the government's court, and it will depend on the government response. And until we have a full government response in terms of compensation, all the other recommendations, it's only then we will be able to judge whether or not this inquiry has been successful or not.
Hi, my name is Emilio. I work for Politico. I have a question which is, obviously we've seen sort of some similarities with this recent post office scandal as well, where it seems like the politicians didn't really take it seriously enough, or potentially worse. Corporate wrongdoing potentially was brushed under the carpet. It's taken a really long time for people to notice that and to get to close to an end to that situation. Do you think, thinking about that and this situation, do we have a kind of wider problem with our society or our politics in terms of listening to people who have been wronged and getting things sorted quickly and trusting them, essentially?
That goes back to what I said earlier about the truth. This is the day of the truth, and it's up to society, up to you, the media, to ensure that that truth gets told and to keep coming back to it. Otherwise, we will be back in a situation, and millions of pounds of money that's been put into this inquiry would have been wasted.
Sorry. I was just going to say, I think that that if we look back at this, it was cost that was a huge factor in why they bought in the American products, in why they didn't screen the blood for transfusion. And now cost is a factor yet again, because it's going to cost much, much more, and has cost much, much more. And that's just in monetary terms, and I'm not thinking then of even the loss of life, which is the most unbearable cost.
Not only is the loss of life, that those people who are still infected need ongoing health and social care needs, and that needs to be addressed within any compensation package, and that needs to be talked about.
I think today sees the victory of truth over power, and you talk about the post office scandal and this scandal. Healthcare and the law are the twin pillars of our civil society, and they've both been rocked to their foundations by both of these scandals. Had this inquiry happened decades ago when it should have happened, might the post office scandal or large parts of it have been avoided? Possibly. And that's the real tragedy of this, that we continue not to learn from failures.
We've mentioned two scandals, this one and the post office. There are many others that coalesce around the Hillsborough Law Now campaign, which Andy Burnham started, such as the nuclear test veterans, Grenfell Tower fire, the story of Zane, who died as a result of toxic matter in a family household. There are so many of these campaigns, and they all need to be looked at.
I think the civil service has closed ranks around a lie for a long time in this inquiry, and I think the similar thing has happened in the post office and many of the other inquiries that Jason has just mentioned. And ministers, sadly, weren't given the truth, and I think that decision was made a long time ago, and money is at the source of it. It seems to be always at the source of it. And we know there were conversations in higher levels of government saying that if you compensate the haemophiliacs, then that sets a precedent. So let's not do it. And when you continue that line, that government line, and closing your ranks around denial, then this is the result of it, and the Post Office is the result of it. And we need systemic change and a duty of candour at all levels of government, including the civil service, to make ministers absolutely aware of what the options are, and then maybe we'd have a chance of not having this repeated.
Thanks. It's Ryan at the Mail. Some of the strongest words in the report today were for Lord Clark, who Sir Brian described as combative and his evidence as argumentative. He said that will have aggravated the distress and upset of many. I wondered if anybody had any thoughts on what Sir Brian said.
I spent 3 days watching Lord Clark giving evidence, and he was patronising in the extreme. He had clearly never met anybody with haemophilia, and considering this is the worst treatment disaster in the history of the NHS, for the Health Secretary not to sit down with that community and actually meet them and learn about what's happened to them is absolutely appalling. And sadly, he continues in that disposition. And I think he owes the community an apology, not just for his time as Health Secretary, but for the manner and the lack of humanity and compassion that he showed when he gave evidence to this inquiry.
And disdain for the inquiry itself and its process.
One of the things that stands out in my mind from Lord Clark's evidence is that he asked, is Factor 8 a pill? He didn't even know what it was. And I actually used that as a way to ask the media to please assist with the public understanding about that product and why it's so dangerous, because it is fundamental to the report today.
It's been a very thorough report. I think Sir Brian has done his job with a very much a degree of compassion, and he has got to the root of what has been happening over many years. He has made some very astute recommendations, and we look forward to the government responding to those in a positive way. We continue to be willing to contribute to that process.
Yes, well, I'd agree with John. We think it's a very thorough report, and Sir Brian has done an excellent job. Our main concern from Wales is what will the government do with the recommendations. From what the little I've seen of the report, because we've come up on a coach from Wales, so I've had a very quick look at it. It seems that there are lots of criticisms within it, and it seems that Wales mirrored what happened in UK government, and decisions were taken without much question. So our main concern obviously was the leading doctor in Wales, Professor Bloom is named in the report, and it seems that he decided the policies that were going to be adopted, and UK government did nothing other than accept them. And we've also noted that Diana Walford is criticised in the report. So, it's very, very concerning that, the factor concentrates, they were meant to, they should have at least been withdrawn by 1978, but they continued to be imported, and they were used on children and newly diagnosed children. So it's all very concerning, but it isn't anything we didn't already know. We know that the patients were treated without consent, and it's just very worrying that government just accepted that, and there was no candor, there was no truthfulness, and that line was taken, and that continued.
As a transfusion victim, I've scanned it quickly, but in the first couple of pages in black and white, in 1965, Germany was looking at their blood donations for raised ALT levels. That was in 1965. If our government had taken that on, and anybody that donated with raised ALT and had taken those out of the donation line, then there would be a lot fewer transfusion victims nowadays. So it vindicates my impression that the knowledge was out there. Our government ignored it, couldn't be bothered with it, found it was going to be too expensive. I don't know what their excuses are, but this blatantly in black and white says that they have no excuses, that every person that died from those times on could have been saved if they'd done the risks and put them in place. So I'm really pleased that it's out there now. Nobody can call us conspiracy theorists. Our truth has been told. It's in black and white, and they've got no place to hide. Any government over the last 30 to 40 years needs to be called to account.
My name is Nigel Hamilton. I'm chairman of Haemophilia NI. I represent a small, if select, community in Northern Ireland. I lost my twin at Christmas Day. I lost 2 cousins within the past 10 years. I lost 2 friends within the past 2 months. We have suffered in Northern Ireland, and the production of this report, as it now comes, has been both healing and supportive. It recognises the injustices that have taken place. It gives us an opportunity to address some of those and try to apply some of the positives that we're going to find in this. But with 7 volumes and only having receipt of 2, and an opportunity to tease through the remaining 5 volumes on phone, it hasn't been easy to find the answers for you at this stage. What I will say is, interestingly, and it's something that's been going on for some time, and the government have now recognised that because of the Prime Minister's statement today and Minister Glenn's statement to a number of group representatives throughout the UK recently, compensation will be paid. That is not an answer to the problems we have, nor is it a solution, but it will help. The other aspect that has come out of this for me is that while I feel a cascade of emotions, positive and negative, I think that it indicates quite clearly that the government are culpable, successive governments are culpable of neglect, of abandonment, and that unfortunately has been a culture which has also been adopted within the health service. I looked at Northern Ireland's report specifically, and I could see from that that it was evident that they followed suit from the leadership that was given in the UK mainland. And I think all regional health departments did. Our Assembly, or our government in Northern Ireland, was highlighted as having two problems, and that's why it couldn't deal with the issues. One of them was security, because there was a big emphasis by ministerial commitment on security. And the other issue was the fact that we have not had consistent government over a practical period of time, and I'm talking years. So Assembly has risen and Assembly has fallen, and Assembly has risen and fallen and has risen again. What they need to understand is they have to show leadership. In all the regions, they have to show leadership. And the one thing that seems to be abandoned here is that leadership and determination to identify the specific issues that impact on their communities have not taken place. So a culture change is required. Candor is required. And transparency, which will involve and engage the patients. I hope that from this report, other victim groups will be able to identify what mustn't happen to them. And the lessons that are provided in this report will be listened to and learnt by government, civil servants and the National Health Service.
Well, my name's Joyce Donnelly and I represent the Scottish Infected Blood Forum. Now, when this inquiry started, I had every faith in Sir Brian and his team, and he has lived up more than I could have expected. I haven't had that much time to look at the report. What I've seen, I read, I was particularly interested in the chapter on Scotland, and the recommendations that were made in Scotland 20 years ago by Lord Ross were never carried through. So one can only hope that these recommendations, and I don't see how they could refute it. How could they possibly refute these recommendations? They stand up. Everything that Sir Brian has put down stands up and has been clarified and proved to be correct. So these recommendations, one hopes, will be carried through to the letter, and people will receive what they should have received 20 years ago, 30 years ago. My late husband had this mantra in his life. He wouldn't apply for Skipton or anything else. He said, the government know what they've done. They know who they've done it to, and it's up to the government to put it right. And if the government can now put it right, then a lot of people have missed out, a lot of people have passed on and died in the interim, but there are still people who are waiting for it to be put right, and that is my hope for the future.
Hi, I'm Shelley Phelps from BBC Wales. I've got a question for Lynn, please. There's a lot of criticism in this report of Professor Bloom, who, as you were just talking about earlier, he led the Cardiff Haemophilia Centre. Can I get your reaction to those findings? Thank you.
Well, we've sort of known the truth for a long time. You know, this has been, a lot of it has been uncovered by the campaigners, but obviously the inquiry has put all this on public record. So the feeling of the group is, you know, it's still very much disbelief that you know, it's now in black and white, but it needed to be put on public record. That, you know, these things had happened. So there was testing without consent on children, and previously untreated patients were given concentrates when they shouldn't have been given concentrates. And that led to an infection of many, many more haemophiliacs than needed to have been infected at the time. So it's just very, very emotional, very, very upsetting for people, because many of the facts we've known for a long time, but to see it in black and white is particularly hard for our group to come to terms with.
Hi, Rachel Hall from The Guardian. Can you give me a sense for how victims and families will be feeling reading the report? And is this the moment that you and they were hoping for? And if there's anything else that you might be looking for going forward, for example, criminal charges?
So as regards victims and families, obviously we've had limited viewing of the report because we've been on a coach for 4 hours, so it's been very difficult. But yeah, it's a feeling of, well, I suppose they now feel that they're believed because it's something that people have been saying for so many years, and that in the large part is how we got the public inquiry. It's all the campaigning that was done by all the people before us who are no longer here, and so we felt it was our duty to carry on the campaign because we knew the truth. Obviously, we've had a lot more revealed by the inquiry, but so there's some kind of feeling of closure. I think the difficulty is that nobody can bring back the people who have been lost, and that is the real, the heartbreaking thing about it. And then when people are actually now learning that this could have been avoided, when we've always been told it was unavoidable, you know, that troubles people immensely. I think our other issue is because there's no trust in government, that even though we know that Rishi Sunak is going to apologise this afternoon and there's going to be an announcement tomorrow, we actually don't, once the announcement comes tomorrow on compensation, we don't actually know the details of that, and we have great concerns about that because it will be an arm's length body, but the government will have already set up all the rules and regulations. So regarding eligibility criteria and appeals. And I think the difficulty now is that Sir Brian's recommendations may be overruled by government or ignored. And that's a real worry for people, that we may still have to keep fighting after 40 years of fighting. You know, so many people have lost their lives, and yet we still have to continue. So I think people are reticent because they've seen what's happened previously with governments, you know, with the way that the history has been rewritten, you know, that nothing had happened that shouldn't have happened. So I feel that the apology is important, but the next stage now of compensation, that is bothering a lot of people because obviously they feel that they want recognition.
Can I come in on that if possible? Thank you. The government have invested taxpayers' money to the tune of 135 million in this public inquiry, which has been going on since 2017 up to today. Quite clearly, that investment, from our perspective, hasn't been foolishly spent. But in order to assure and reassure our community, there needs to be more than just words from the government, and not looking unfairly towards them, a choreography towards an election. So from our perspective, the opportunity to continue this process to its proper conclusion is the advancement of the principles and the objectives and the recommendations of this report. That will only be borne out by the positive position that the government take and filling those words with some positive action.
Yeah, but the mantra that the government used to trot out about they received the best possible treatment available at the time has now been proved to be a lie. They can't say that anymore. They did not receive the best possible treatment available. And they died because of it.
And compensation isn't the be-all and end-all. Infected are still struggling to get scans, 6 monthly scans, treatment. The government and the NHS should have a duty of care towards us. They infected us. They've given us death sentences. We shouldn't have to be queued up for scans, and there should be best practice throughout the country, not a lottery of what hospital you go to. So until that is put in place for the infected, and hopefully if it's put in place it may prevent some early deaths, then money's nothing and talk's nothing. We need to have that input as well, the medical input.
Also, I think another key point moving forward is education of the medical profession, because people haven't been informed about it. It hasn't been part of the medical training, and that has caused huge problems for our community because the average medic does not understand what happened to them. And I think all of that needs to be put on, as Sir Brian will, it's on public record, but that actually needs to be implemented.
And going forward, people that have blood transfusions now, my daughter had them regularly as a renal patient. I was told by a reporter who wrote books who lost a son with CJD, there's a disclaimer on the blood bags now saying that if you have this blood, you may have pathogens. A disclaimer on a blood bag that you're not told about is nothing. That's just trying to prevent another inquiry like this 30, 40 years down the line. They need to be informing people and giving them choices. Not always is a blood transfusion necessary. Sometimes it may be, sometimes it's not. But at least tell the patients that are receiving them the risks that they're taking so that you can choose.
And also, I think, is the fact that Sir Brian has pointed to the lack of candor and openness regarding the entire state on this issue, and that all needs to change. And I think institutions shouldn't just say they are being, you know, they're working within those rules anyway, because it's evident that isn't happening. And it's ministers are involved, it's right the way through the state, it's a complete failure. And had there not been a cover-up and the line adopted and the line defended, we wouldn't all be sitting here 40 years later doing this, and we wouldn't have lost all the people we've lost.
Hi, I'm Susie Forrest from BBC Scotland News. A couple of things. You've sort of said you've not learned anything that you didn't already know, and those of us who have been interviewing you all these years have heard you say all these things many times. So I suppose that's one question, is just, is there anything new in this that you didn't know that you've discovered? And also, from what you've been saying, a lot of what will be required to take any of this forward will actually be up to the devolved governments, and you know, all the attention will be on the Westminster government today and tomorrow perhaps, but how do you want to see them work together with the governments in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland to deal with some of the things you've been talking about, whether that's the way the health service works or education?
Well, the government in Scotland, to their credit, I mean, they set up the SIBSS, which is the Scottish Infected Blood Support Scheme, and they were, you know, the forerunners of that. And that has been a godsend to people, having that amount of money coming in. They know they're going to get it. They've got a, you know, finite. It's like getting your salary, although these people can't have a salary because they're not well enough. You know, they've been made ill by the treatment. So the Scottish Government, to their credit, as I say, set up the Scottish Infected Blood Support Scheme. That's been working very well. Where we go from there with the devolved government, I mean, I wouldn't hesitate to guess, but we're hoping that things can go on as they are for the foreseeable future. Because, as I say, people are dependent. People are dependent. It's given them a security. People who lost their jobs, people who weren't well enough to work, they didn't have any financial security anymore. They couldn't get insurance. They couldn't get mortgages. And this has given them something that has to be sustained for the mental welfare as much as their physical welfare.
When I spoke to Minister Glenn in Belfast with two of my colleagues, we pressed him, the first issue we pressed him on was giving statutory cover for the daily living allowance that he provides on a monthly and quarterly basis. The authority for that will hand over to the independent authority, compensation authority, and legislation will change in the respective regions to accommodate that. We have BSO, which is the Business Services Organisation, not unlike our colleagues in either region. That works very well for us. We have established, in conjunction with the Department of Health, a practical stakeholders group, which I myself have had the opportunity to chair as a victim, and which is co-chaired by one of the senior civil servants who deals specifically with infected blood. We have a good working relationship. The Health Committee in Northern Ireland wants to work along in partnership with the victims, and I've been asked to address them at formal sitting in relation to victims' views on the victims and prisoners legislation and how that is going to apply in Northern Ireland. In Northern Ireland, it's a slightly different situation because, as in Scotland and in Northern Ireland, the legislation primarily for prisoners, etc., was UK-based, but it was England and Wales. So our Secretary, Health Department and our Minister for Health and our committee have been working closely along with ourselves in lobbying at Westminster to try and make positive things happen so we are included in the UK process and not excluded. That applies both in Scotland and Northern Ireland. Our Assembly operates differently. It has different rules and regulations. It has different capacity to provide its own source of income. So we want to see the continuation of the commitment to the victims that this Minister, Robin Swan, has shown, and also the Health Committee as it currently sits. And that will give us confidence in the local work that the Assembly is doing to include us in this process as they take over their responsibility.
So in Wales, we'd just like them to, we'd like Sir Brian's interim report recommended on compensation, and I don't really think we can comment on it because we don't know what the government's going to do with it, and that will give us many sleepless nights. So, you know, I met with John Glenn 2 weeks ago and I took the list of the 28 people who have never been included in a scheme, have never been given any compensation at all. And Sir Brian's recommendations is that those payments should be made through the current support scheme. So there's no delay, and government needs not to delay this and not wait for the scheme to be set up. So that's so the parents of the 380 children across the UK can get the payments quickly, and the children who lost their fathers. And I think that's an urgent requirement. Sorry, I had to get that in because I thought we hadn't mentioned enough about the